thank you for joining us for the very first session in our new GroundsWell Early Career Researchers and Partners webinar. I'm Ellie King and I'll be your host today. This series is all about highlighting the innovative research methods being used across the GroundsWell Consortium and with its partners, bringing together early career researchers and community partners to share their insights, experiences, and approaches to tackling complex issues like health inequalities and meaningful community engagement. Today's session, we can't do it without them, sets the tone for what this series is all about: collaboration, co-production, and making research more inclusive and impactful. We're excited to hear from two fantastic speakers who exemplify this ethos. Ruth Livesey from Regenerus, one of our Innovation Fund partners, and Rebecca Crook, who's been leading on participatory approaches like photovoice and co-designed research methods. We'll have time for questions and discussions after the talks, but please do use the chat or question and answer function throughout so we can come back to them at the end. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Ruth and Rebecca.
Okay, can you hear and see everything that you need to see, Ellie?
Yeah, that's all coming up fine for me.
Fab, thank you. Okay, so as Ellie said, our presentation today is about public involvement in research and use of participatory research methods. We can't do it without them, which is Ruth's lovely addition. So a brief outline of our presentation today. Ruth is organiser of Interesting Stuff at Regenerus, is going to talk about the Our Beautiful Grot Spots project, talking about why the Powys Streets neighbourhood, co-creating and co-designing the project, a summary of project activities. Then I will talk a little bit more about GroundsWell's approach to co-production and co-designing the evaluation for the Our Beautiful Grot Spots project, and finally touching on some participatory research methods that we've used for that project and another project that Regenerus are leading on as well. So Ruth, take it away.
As Rebecca said, yes, I'm Ruth Livesey, and basically I head up a small social enterprise and charity based in Bootle. And I just want to run through Our Beautiful Grot Spots, which is a really good example of the type of work that we have been doing, and it's also something where we've worked closely with GroundsWell in terms of the overall evaluation of the project as well. So Rebecca, next slide, please. The project itself is funded by the Heritage Lottery, and we started in October 23. It's a pilot project, and as such, what we wanted to do was really look at quite a small neighbourhood area for the investment of the activity. I'm hoping that might make sense to people, but you can kind of get the impression it's lots of terrace streets in rows coming off Main Road, quite a typical Georgian neighbourhood. It's based in Bootle. As I said, we're based in Bootle. We're in the south of the borough of Sefton, which is just north of Liverpool. And literally, as you move from the north to the south, the air quality improves. So the borough itself runs all the way along the coast, right up to Southport. And Bootle really suffers in the south. We've got the docks, we've got arterial roads, we've got really poor air quality as a result of that. We've got all the things that you might expect from communities needing a lot of investment. So we've got high levels of unemployment, poor health. And part of the contributing factors to that is the environmental landscape. So, you know, we have a lot of fly tipping, all these things then impact on the community that lives there. So this was why we chose this area. And as I said, because it was a pilot, what we wanted to do was look at quite a small geographical area and really connect with the community, because underpinning our whole approach to this project was our belief that the community knows what will work and the community also knows what won't work. And they are more than prepared to tell us about that. So that's really been our way forward. The next slide. So as I say, it's a pilot project, and we started in October 23. And the aim, the key outputs for the project were to revitalise 2 locations within the neighbourhood in terms of environmental improvements. The starting point for this was to ask the community which locations we should be working on together. Underpinning this whole project, it's all about being the community leading the projects, the community making those decisions, and basically us as a team facilitating the process and supporting the process and not making those decisions on anybody's behalf. So we started off in the autumn, inviting the community to come along on walkabouts with us to start to talk about what sorts of ideas for environmental improvements they might like, but also, as I say, to identify the 2 locations. And along with this, when we, having done our walks, we then returned to one of our local community partners to warm up over a cup of tea. As you can see, basically we weren't rained off, but we were rained on several occasions in our community walks. But we would return for a cup of tea and a biscuit and a warm up. And also, Rebecca was with us, and have that opportunity to also include the participants in the evaluation design process. I'll let Rebecca talk about that bit, but I just wanted to highlight this was very early on in the project, time-wise. We actually ended up with 3 sites that the community said they wanted to work on, and so we said, yeah, we can manage that. And so early spring the next year, we started to do some of the environmental activities, and then carried on throughout the year. So the 3 sites basically are 2 parks that didn't have a great deal of colour in them. Grass, yes, to be fair, but very little flowers. Trees, green trees, not the most interesting park, shall we say, in terms of biodiversity. The ideas that the community had come up with included planting lots more bulbs, or getting lots of bulbs in there, introducing wildflowers, and you'll find basically this is the easiest way to describe our project is to show you the pictures. And so these are the examples in the first with the wildflowers, basically working with both the community and also local schools. We sowed wildflower corridors in the parks. In the second picture, what you can see there is piles of daffodil bulbs. We actually, over the 3 sites, have, with the community, planted over 10,000 spring bulbs. This was last autumn. And so you can see there, the result of this in spring this year was adding so much more colour to the park spaces. And we've had lovely feedback from local residents to say they've really appreciated this. And the final picture on the right hand side is then just showing in March 24 an example of what we term a rubble wildflower plot, which basically we have introduced in say March this year with the community again. We've held 2 big celebration events in the park, and the community have got involved in adding to the environmental improvements. And this was great fun because it involved shoveling lots of sand and rubble and mixing that with biochar and compost, and then sowing seeds in it. So the kids loved it. Part of the project as well also included, as you might expect, heritage lottery, a little bit of heritage research, looking into what we could find out a little bit more around the sites that the community had selected to work on. And so we'll be adding that information and the history of the sites that we found, or the community have found. And also we had lots of creative workshops and have over 100 poems that have been created with the community and by the community throughout those workshops. Thanks, Rebecca. I think there's one more, is there? Thank you. So yeah, just to emphasise, all 3 sites have been chosen by our community and improved by our community. And these are kind of, trying to get a little bit of a sense of before and after for you, but so on the left hand side you can see how Bland Peel Road Park looked, and what we have added with the corridor along the wildflower corridor basically is lots of colour throughout the summer. Obviously also adding to nature, more nature on the doorstep, more positive mental health, more positive well-being. And yeah, this is just to give you the overall sense really of the sort of activities that we have been involved in at the 3 different sites. All of this with the community and designed by the community. So what we have done is help to make those things happen. Hopefully that's just given you a little sense of our project, and I think Rebecca will be able to explain a lot more in terms of how the community were also very important in terms of our evaluation research as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. That was great to have an introduction to the GroundsWell project, and yeah, I'm going to just talk a little bit more about the collaborative approach to the evaluation, which I know was really important to Regenerus and to Ruth, but then also really important to GroundsWell as well. So I'm sure many people are familiar with this, but just to kind of say a little bit about GroundsWell. So our vision is for a community and data-led systems transformation of how to plan, create, maintain and promote use of the networks of urban green and blue spaces. These spaces shaped by and for the benefit of everyone should make a significant contribution to reducing the levels of and inequalities in non-communicable diseases. So picture here from our consortium members. So the GroundsWell Consortium is a team of researchers, local communities, implementers and policymakers. By working together, we'll all better understand and evidence the role of urban green and blue spaces within the wider social, economic, environmental, cultural and health systems. Identifying and implementing actions to maximise health benefits from urban green and blue spaces. Our democratisation of the research and decision-making process are based on principles of co-design, co-implementation, co-evaluation and co-translation. I've really tried to kind of embolden and highlight the parts of those statements that I think are really relevant for this presentation, and that last sentence around the importance of collaboration for GroundsWell and the work that we do. So as I said, it's really vital to the work that we do, and I'm sure a lot of people here know that the benefits to research from including people from both within the more academic research community and people outside of that more academic research community as a process of shared learning. So this can be described in loads of different ways: co-production, collaboration, or participant and public involvement and engagement. But for us researchers, this can mean working in partnership with participants on a project or stakeholders like Regenerus as a project partner, but also with patients, members of the public, carers, service users, as well as people from wider society. So Ellie in particular, Impact Lead, does a lot of work thinking about policy briefs and working with policymakers. So it really is vital to all of the work that we do in GroundsWell. And as it focuses on urban green and blue space interventions for addressing non-communicable diseases, public involvement really ensures that those initiatives are tailored to the specific needs of communities within their sometimes quite specific and complex urban environments, as Ruth outlined there with a particular neighbourhood that we've been working in Bootle. And we have a dedicated work package 3, which is all around community innovation, co-production and citizen science for urban green and blue spaces. So we think about this collaborative approach as kind of the timing and extent of stakeholder involvement as differentiating these different terms. So co-creation, thinking about working together with different people to understand complex issues. So kind of like that early stage of collaboration, co-design, teaming up with those people and others to find solutions for those problems. And then co-production, putting into action a solution that everybody's agreed upon. So co-creation is that early stage, engaging people before problem definition to really understand that problem. So as Ruth said, kind of doing those walking around the neighbourhood and really understanding some of the challenges that people faced living in that area and maybe not having an accessible, like nice green space to use. Co-design, teaming up with us to find solutions for those specific problems. So again, the walk-arounds, those ideas generation workshops that I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. And then finally putting into action a solution that everyone has agreed upon. And so facilitating problem solving and then involving stakeholders in the implementation phase. So co-producing that change together. So our beautiful grot spots. So the project that Ruth was talking about there, it is funded by National Lottery Heritage Fund, and it's a variety of activities combining local history research, so that kind of archival research, really getting people to learn a bit more about their neighbourhood. I think Ruth has mentioned this to me before, and people have said to me before that until those archival research, they hadn't kind of put together the poet streets, and that all the streets surrounding that park have all got poets' names. So there's Burns Street, Wordsworth Street, Shelley Street. So yeah, really kind of understanding more about the community and the history of that neighbourhood as well. So linking that up with kind of more creative outputs. So working, I'll touch on this in a couple of slides, but having some more creative outputs. So Ruth touched on there the poetry, and there's some photographs as well that have come out of this project. And then leading to the co-creation of, it says 2 here, but as Ruth said, it turned out to be 3 nature-based heritage installations within the Poet Streets Park. So with regards to the more research side of things, we at the beginning of last year, January 2024, we conducted what we call an evaluability assessment, but we called it ideas generation workshops. And the purpose of this is to inform decision making in terms of whether or not to evaluate a programme or intervention and the best approach to take. So as Ruth said, this was a pilot project. So we really wanted to engage the community, not only in Ruth engaging them within the project but design, but also in the evaluation design as well. So we organised 3 interactive workshops with 12 community stakeholders, which included project partners, but also quite a few local residents as well, to identify, as you can see on the picture here, kind of individual perceived individual outcomes, and then more wider community outcomes that they anticipated might come from the Our Beautiful Grot Spots project. We then considered how these might be best measured, so what research methods would be most suitable, and most importantly, how the community could meaningfully take part in the evaluation. And it was really helpful to get that experience of people that have lived in that community for a long time to say, well, if you do that, no one's really going to complete it, so you need to do it this way. And it was just really helpful to get that lived experience perspective on what type of methods would engage the people that live in the Poet Streets. So, and then data generated during the workshop, so that included these field notes, but also some written responses from participants, were sorted into immediate, intermediate and more long-term outcomes. And then we worked with Regenerus and other community partners to prioritise which of these outcomes to measure, and we agreed the methods for collecting this evaluation data. So as we said, the stakeholders here were so involved in this evaluation design. And that then led us, so using this data, we collaborated to develop this logic model to show the theory of change for the Our Beautiful Grot Spots pilot project. So it includes contextual factors. So we've got more kind of micro factors at the top, which includes, as Ruth kind of said in one of her earlier slides, that this is previously connected community, but the area over the last couple of decades has experienced significant deterioration. Things like fly tipping, vermin, graffiti, vandalism, dogfiling, which the residents, they really want to talk about these things because it really affects their lives and their experiences of living in that area. and meaning that they can feel that no one really cares about the area, and that can then make people a bit more socially isolated because they don't spend a lot of time outside in those more public communal spaces. And then at the bottom there's some more macro contextual factors which we kind of were considering. So as Ruth said, residents in Bootle are living in the most deprived ward of Sefton. Lineker is the ward and the fourth most deprived ward in England. And as we know, urban green and blue space can have direct and indirect effects on non-communicable disease, and green space exposure in particular can improve mental well-being, physical activity, and reduce inequalities in health. And then we kind of have the theory of change. So all the resources that were required to make this project happen, including people's time, the funding, but also quite importantly, that the support from the local authority. And then the different activities there in green and the tangible outputs of the green infrastructure, but also the creative outputs of the poetry and the photographs, hopefully leading to these immediate, intermediate and more long-term outcomes and impact. So I'm going to go through all of those, but they're essentially the things that the members of the community and project partners wanted to see as the outcomes from this project. So we co-designed a mixed methods evaluation with the community partners to measure these expected outcomes. So short postcard-sized questionnaires were preferred with no more than 3 questions. So as I said, really insightful, helpful information with regards to how much data to collect without overwhelming people and to mean that people would take part, along with more participatory methods, which I'll touch on again in a second, including photo voice interviews. And the residents also suggested that data collection should take place during community events. So as Ruth said, Regenerus have put on these big community events to do some planting, but then also using these as opportunities to collect data from people and get them to complete these postcard evaluation forms. And this would therefore promote engagement and participation in the evaluation. So that's kind of the evaluation approach that we took for our beautiful grot spots with regards to designing that and co-designing that with the participants. And now I just want to spend a few minutes touching on some participatory research methods that we used. So for our beautiful grot spots in particular, the stakeholders that we talked to in those ideas generation workshop really liked the idea of the photo voice interview method. I think that really tied in nicely to the project, the creative element of this project with the poetry. Anybody that came to the GroundsWell retreat at the end of last year will have seen me and Hannah did an early careers presentation where we one of the project partners, the more creative partner, Abby, had done a voiceover reciting some of the poetries that she'd written with members of the community, and we laid that over different pictures that had been taken as well. So it was a really creative element to this project, and so we thought the photo voice method would really complement that, and people really were excited by that idea. So just some with consent of the participants, I've just got some pictures here of some of the photographs that they've taken, and I'm currently doing the analysis of all of that data. And this essentially is a method to use photographs to speak to people's experiences and kind of show their experiences of taking part in something, but also living in an area that has experienced, fly tipping, as you can see on the left, and bonfires that stay there for a while and need to get cleaned up, and lots of fly tipping. That I think that was Regenerus putting it all together and putting tape around it so it could all get collected. So using photographs as a way of showing their experiences, and then using those photographs to scaffold an interview as well, scaffold a discussion about their experiences of taking part and living in this area, and what being involved in this project, but also having access to these green spaces means to them. And then as you move to the left, some kind of more positive pictures, really beautiful one of the bee there taken by one of our community researchers on the flower, and then the wildflowers outside the park, and the bottom right one there, one of the community researchers who's got really involved in this work over the last year, I'd say, and planting a bulb on one of those celebration days that we had. And then there's also another project, Nature in Lineker, which, if Ruth doesn't mind, I can touch on a little bit. So just to touch on some more participatory research methods and really kind of co-production and involving people in the research. So doing research with people rather than having it done to them. So Nature and Lineker, GroundsWell, for those that don't know, has an innovation fund where project partners have been able to apply for funding from GroundsWell to do kind of a grassroots project where the funding goes to them, and the theme's all around growing together. So Regenerus was successful in getting innovation funding. So this is for the Nature and Lineker project. So this is to undertake a community-based environmental appraisal of the Lineker ward, Bootle, which Ruth mentioned earlier, growing together through increased knowledge, personal skills and confidence to understand the relationship the community has with the natural environment and deliver a collaborative, local and comprehensive natural capital benefits assessment, a needs and opportunity mapping exercise and an action plan. So essentially this is working with community researchers, members of the community, training them up in some methods, and it will lead up to this report which will be identifying places and spaces in the Lineker ward where maybe there can be improvements made to the green space and that natural environment. And a couple of methods that we've used with these community researchers. So the Our Outdoors app is an app that's been developed by the kind of Edinburgh hub of GroundsWell. And it's a app which some people may be aware of. If you don't have it, you can download it for free. And it's a way of recording your experience of any outdoor space. So you take a picture and then you can record what you're doing in that space, who you're with, what's happening around you, but then also your experiences and how you're feeling within that space. And we thought that would be a really helpful tool for the community researchers for the Nature and Lineker project to start thinking about that kind of natural capital benefits, but also the needs and opportunity mapping exercise in particular, where they can record pictures of the ward and spaces and what's happening in those spaces and where they might be some areas for improvement with regards to the natural environment. So I went over a couple of months ago now and did a bit of training with the community researchers around using that app. And then the next one is data visualization. So our data manager, Roberto, went over and met with Ruth and the community researchers as well. And I've asked him to provide me with a summary because it is not a language that I speak fluently. But he said that in this initial session, the group got together and talked about different assets that would be of interest for the project. So thinking about data and visualizing data, how this could be helpful in particular for Nature and Lineker. And they agreed on the creation of both static data visualization, so things that could actually be used in the reports, but then also more interactive visualizations to reach a wider audience. And I know that GroundsWell, in our work package for data work package, we are thinking about how we can maybe create some kind of data dashboard so that members of the public can look at that data and interact with it and tell their stories a little bit more with data in particular. And just some final thoughts. So this type of work is a huge part of what I do in my role in GroundsWell, and I love it. And I've spent a lot of time up in Bootle with Ruth and with that community. And it's really this successful and valuable collaboration, as it says here, really does take time and effort, but can have a huge impact on project success. And that's really evident in the work that Ruth does with Regenerus and with other project partners that they work with up there. And co-production and participatory research methods can really benefit a research project. So as I said, that doing research with people and not to them, because community partners and stakeholders and participants, as we might call them, experts by experience, really do offer those local insights that might otherwise be omitted from evaluation designs. And yeah, those really nuanced things that might only be really applicable to one project in one specific area, you're only really going to get that from the people that live there and experience that day to day. So yeah, it's been a really valuable partnership and collaboration. And yeah, the data should be coming hopefully in the next year or so. So you might hear some more from us from this project. And finally, I know Ellie always likes to link to our newsletter. So if anybody wants to scan that, and you can find out more and be updated on GroundsWell. Ellie, I think maybe back over to you.
Yeah, I'll just leave that up for one more second while I say thank you so much to both of our speakers for your insightful and inspiring presentations. You can stop sharing now, that'll be fine, Rebecca, thank you. I think you've both given us quite a lot to think about there. I'm sure there's a few questions, but I think one thing that I could really see was the strength of your working relationship together and the benefits that have quite clearly come from that. And so I wonder what, Ruth, you might say to researchers looking to start out on more collaborative work, what might be the best way for researchers to reach out to potential partners and maybe flip it around as well to Rebecca about how about community organisations looking to increase their collaboration with university researchers? What would you say about people starting out there?
That's quite interesting, because it's one of those things you kind of just live through. I don't think you necessarily, maybe other people, maybe I should pretend to be more strategic about this. But, you know, it is one of those things that there's so much good stuff, and we know that from even just the examples of the projects through the Innovation Fund, don't we, of the wonderful things that are happening, and that have that, you know, a really good fit with GroundsWell objectives as well in terms of research objectives overall. I don't really know in terms of how those connections necessarily happen, though. It's because it's, in my experience anyway, it's connections come through your conversations, like-minded people, isn't it? And somebody will introduce and somebody will introduce, and all of a sudden you end up that you know, the university is then aware of your projects, or, you know, my link really is an historic one. So I had contact with Sarah Rogers, Liverpool lead on GroundsWell, I think. And I'd had contact with Sarah before, so that's kind of where that came about. But then, yeah, I don't think I've got any top tips to offer, unfortunately. I'm sorry, because it's, how do you find out what's out there? I don't know, because we most of the time communicate in quite different circles.
I guess it's more about getting out there and getting involved.
Yeah.
With the people you want to work with.
Yeah, I mean, in terms, just to add though, in terms of one, it's the challenge is finding the right connections. Once the connections are made, there to me are very few challenges then, in terms of, you know, Rebecca and Hannah basically, and yourself also, but is coming out and actually coming out with us and meeting the community that we work with, and everything goes from there, doesn't it? So relationships and trust then start to build. And also it is part of that, you know, being very clear in terms of communication with the community about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and why we're doing it with them, and why they are actually the most important part of the whole process, really. So providing we are thinking about the information we're sharing and how we're sharing that information, it starts to build the trust that then makes the whole process easier along the journey, I think. So, yeah.
Thanks. Rebecca, do you have anything to add to that?
Not really. I think it is just a case of, yeah, but as you build your networks and those grow. Like I'd never worked in urban green and blue space research before GroundsWell, but then you just get to know people, don't you? And I think it is very much the responsibility for us researchers to make sure that the public are engaged in our research. But I think having access to these types of spaces, and spaces where lots of different members of different organisations and different sectors come together and learn about what each other do, I think is the best way of just finding out about what's going on. I don't think there's like perfect recipe for how that all happens, but it seems to just either work or it doesn't work. But I think if everybody has the similar principles, and I think like Ruth and Regenerus have really similar principles to GroundsWell with regards to public involvement and engagement, then that seems to be when it works well, is when you kind of share those principles of collaboration.
We also have a question in the Q&A section asking, how do you select community stakeholders to participate in the ideas generation workshop?
Ruth, do you want to take this? I guess it was just getting out there and telling people about what was going on.
Sorry, can you just repeat? Sorry, I didn't catch the whole question. So.
Yes, how did you select community stakeholders to participate in the ideas generation workshops?
Well, in terms of reaching out and engaging in the first place, or making sure people were aware of that opportunity, and that was through well, spreading the net as widely as possible through every way we could think of, to be honest, but very much at a grassroots level. So yes, we put stuff out on social media, and because we do a lot of work within the community setting anyway, we have quite a few followers. But actually, it was literally right down to beyond a neighbourhood level. It was kind of corner shops, doctors' surgeries, community organisations that we work with very closely anyway, all not just having posters and information to invite people in the first place. It was also about talking to people to encourage, so talking to partners that we work with to encourage them to talk to the local residents that use their services. And so we just, like you just need to kind of get the word on the street, if you like, and identifying, I don't like to use the phrase really, but you're kind of your community activists, but the community voices, and if you make sure your community voices know about stuff, things will spread further. But then our whole message was really about how important it was that everybody's voice was heard and that people came along and really told us what they think. And the teach opportunity throughout the project, that's always, when I say opportunity, whether it's an activity, whether it's a conversation, whether it's, you know, we're just finishing off the project now with some what will be fantastic floral illustrations on bollards, concrete bollards around the park. And again, the community have been part of that whole design process. But we get the most people turn up from actual conversations, I think. Well, in terms of referrals, in terms of reach and engagement, the majority of the success comes from conversations, not necessarily the printed word or social media. That's communities for you, isn't it? You need to kind of be on the street, basically, and chatting to people. Yeah.
Okay, I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. So we've got one here asking, do you have any tips on how you ensure PPI, so patient and public involvement, is truly inclusive without just involving the most accessible and agreeable voices? A fun one.
This is a question that I think just comes when you're doing this type of work. This is the question. How do you make it so it's not I don't know who used this term, but I've definitely heard it over the last year or two, and I've reused it, saying like the usual suspects. So people who are maybe already engaged, already interested, have the time available to be able to attend things. It's really tricky, I think, not just from the work that we're doing with Regenerus, but with some of our other partners. I think it's about building those connections with lots of different organisations that work with lots of different communities within so I guess the Poet Streets is a relatively small community, but so kind of, I guess, even slightly more easier to do because, as like Ruth said, there's some really core community groups and organisations that work there that then were kind of, you know, to get into that wider community. But I think thinking about a bigger project than this, and maybe a bigger geographical area, really making those connections. I think about another partner that we're working with over in Birkenheads, thinking about those connections with different organisations that work with different community groups within, you know, an area, and just really publicising and learning about when they may or might not be able to take part in things, what would make things more accessible to them. We often, like Ruth does events at the weekends, and again, another partner we're working with, we're doing lots of things on Saturdays so that people who are working in the week can attend, or people have families, maybe can bring children along, so making sure that spaces are suitable for children. If funding allows, be able to support things like childcare and have money available to pay people for their involvement. So yeah, lots of tricks there, but all of that does require a lot of investment and time, and really building trust, I think, as well, with people who may feel less trusting of people kind of swooping into their neighbourhoods and wanting to do things with them where they may have felt let down in the past. So but yeah, I think that particular point about it being truly inclusive and not just involving the most accessible and agreeable voices is the biggest challenge here. And I think that we just really try our best to do that. I don't think it's perfect, but it always feels like the question with this type of work. But yeah, a few little things there, like the main thing is going to people and not expecting them to come to you. So learning about where those people are, when they're going to be there, building that trust, and yeah, definitely going to them and not always just saying, okay, we're going to be doing this at this time on this day, come and see us and give us all of your knowledge. So yeah, that's the main things I can think of. I don't know whether Ruth has anything to add.
Probably not really, I don't think, in terms of top tips. The only, and this, it's not a direct answer to the question, but just finishing off what Rebecca was saying, I think there's also that the importance of helping people recognise how much they are valued in terms of their ideas and their contributions and what they are sharing, which is not addressing how we reach the people who are not the usual suspects, but in terms of, I don't know, respecting people's involvement, respecting people's time, but also helping them understand how they are part of the influence and shaping of the project, as well as the actual delivery of the project. It's just what is very important to us, to make sure we convey that message. But then I also think that might possibly help them in terms of participants and then talking to their families and their friends and other people in the community. And that also we find sometimes somebody will pop along because somebody told me about this. You know, my neighbour was talking about this, so I thought I'd come along, you know. So it's just about, trying to create that little bit of a buzz that might mean somebody else hears about it and gets involved. But
okay, and then our last question here was, these projects sound great, but how do you think that these pilot projects can be applied more widely if research and HLF funding isn't available? Which I think kind of marries the opposite of what Rebecca was saying as well.
Yeah, I think I would like to live in a world where pilot projects that are successful automatically lead to the funders then encouraging people to take them and innovate and introduce them in different areas, to look at comparable, comparing between neighbourhoods and seeing what we can learn from pilots. I mean, any projects, it's not just a pilot project. We've approached this as a pilot on the basis that we can learn from it and hopefully go back to do more of the good stuff and improve on the stuff that we will learn hasn't gone so well. But then, we're not at that stage yet, really, so we're just finishing this project, and that will be yet another proposal to pull together and to hopefully down the line be successful. But yeah, it's an interesting question, really, isn't it? At the end of the day, there's not enough money out there for all the fab stuff that goes on. I have come across so many projects that I'd love to bring here and replicate, and you just think, oh, that's amazing, but where would I get the funding to do it? It's life. We all carry on and we find bits here and there, and every so often it comes together and you do manage to do it, I guess.
I guess that sort of links in with that full circle of the questions that we've been answering, is if you have the right contacts and you've got the same principles and you keep working at things together, it's just keeping going. Right. Okay, well, great. Well, thank you to everyone who joined us today and contributed to the discussion there. I'll pass on any of the unanswered questions to our presenters via email. If you can keep an eye out for details of our next session in the series, and if you're interested in presenting in a future webinar, we'd love to hear from you. Until then, take care, and thanks again for everybody being part of this important conversation.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thank you.